The metal bench was cold beneath Lena Trujillo's legs, but she'd sat in worse places. What stung wasn't the weight. It was the laughter echoing off the depot walls, 3 young voices mocking the faded jacket she'd earned in blood and sand. She didn't flinch, didn't explain. Just waited like she'd waited in ambush positions, where one sound meant death. Because some truths don't need defending, they need witnessing. Before we continue, please subscribe to our channel and stay with us until the end of this story. Comment below with your city so we can see how far Lena's journey travels. Now let's begin. Lena Trujillo knew people saw what they wanted to see. The 3 second lieutenants near the supply counter saw a 52-year-old woman in a sun-bleached field jacket. They saw gray streaks in pulled-back hair. They saw scuffed boots and the slight favor she gave her right leg. They saw someone who didn't fit. They didn't see what cost her that limp. She stood in line, authorization form folded once in her left hand. Breathed steady. In through the nose 4 counts. Out through the mouth 6. Old habit, from when steady breathing meant clean shots, when panic spread faster than fire through a convoy. Jesus, did you see that jacket? The voice cut through the depot's hum. Tall lieutenant, high and tight, so fresh the skin above his ears looked raw. Name tape read, Myers. Looks like she pulled it from a dumpster behind the PX. The other 2 laughed. One was broader Tennessee drawl. Holland. The third kept pushing wire-rimmed glasses up his nose. Chen. Probably stolen valor, Holland said, not bothering to lower his voice. People buy surplus gear walk around pretending. Chen hesitated. Should we report it? Nah, let supply deal with it. They'll laugh her out when she can't produce real paperwork. Lena didn't turn. She'd heard worse from better men. The line moved and she moved with it. Metal pins in her right leg, grinding against scar tissue that never quite forgot Crimson Ridge. Next. The specialist behind the counter looked tired. Garcia, his name tape read. She handed him the authorization. He glanced at it. At her. Back at it. Ma'am, this is for weekend training. Volunteer consultant with the 3rd Battalion. Correct. You need boot size. 8.5 wide. Camelback hydration system 3 liter. Behind her, Myers snorted. Consultant? Is that what we're calling it now? Holland laughed. Dude, come on. What? Look at that jacket. That thing's seen hell. Wrong kind of hell. Chen's voice dropped. Maybe we shouldn't what? We're just making observations. Garcia's fingers stopped on the keyboard. His eyes flicked to Lena's face, an offer to intervene. She gave him the smallest headshake. Some lessons people had to learn themselves. 15 minutes, ma'am, when Garcia gestured to metal benches along the wall. You can wait there? Thank you, specialist. Every step was deliberate. The hitch in her right leg always showed when she was tired, and 4 hours of pre-dawn driving from Columbus had wrung her out. But she didn't limp. Wouldn't give them that satisfaction. She sat spine-straight, hands resting on her thighs. The jacket was worn, yeah. Woodland camouflage faded to gray-green under a Middle Eastern sun that had tried to kill her daily for 18 months. Frayed cuffs, a patch on the left elbow, where she'd torn it on concertina wire during a night extraction, hand-stitched by Medic Patterson in the back of a supply truck. Patterson, who'd hummed Johnny Cash while he worked. Who'd talked about his daughter's softball games back in Tennessee. Who'd died in 2013 in a car accident outside Fort Hood, which felt like God's cruelest joke. The unit tag on her right shoulder had faded almost to nothing. Ghost stitching. Most people wouldn't notice. But Lena could trace it in her sleep. 519th Echo. Response Group. A unit that didn't exist in official records, spun up for specific operations, dissolved when those operations ended. Triple black protocol. Need to know only. The kind of work that didn't make newspapers. Even if it's real surplus, you can't just wear it around, Myers was saying. There are regulations. She's in civilian clothes, Chen pointed out. The jacket's just a jacket. With military patches, ghost patches for ghost missions. Holland's laugh was sharp. Maybe she's a secret ninja who shops at Goodwill. Their laughter wasn't mean exactly, just thoughtless. The easy cruelty of people who'd never questioned their place, who'd walked through life with credentials visible and validated. Fresh officers, maybe months out of ROTC or OCS, still surprised they got to wear the uniform. Lena had seen thousands like them. Some grew into it, learned humility, learned to listen. Others never did. She pulled out her phone. 11 minutes. A door opened across the room. Civilian contractor pushed a heavy cart through older guy graying beard Fort Adwell badge on his shirt. He maneuvered toward the counter, then stopped. Looked at Lena. At her jacket. At her shoulder. The color drained from his face like someone opened a tap. His hands went white on the cart handle. He stood frozen, staring at the ghost outline of that patch. He knew. He'd lost someone who'd seen that patch. Or he'd been there himself, adjacent operations, the kind of overlap that happened in triple black work. The kind where you never forgot the units that pulled your ass out of the fire. Lena met his eyes. Nodded once. The contractor swallowed hard. Nodded back. Then he pushed his cart forward fast, disappearing through another door, and Lena knew he'd be making phone calls within 5 minutes. Good. You see that... Myers was watching. Even contractors are weirded out. Maybe she smells... Holland offered. Dude. What, I'm kidding. Garcia called another name. A sergeant collected a duffel. The depot rhythm continued, form stamps, equipment changing hands. Lena let it wash over her, let her mind drift to the email that brought her here. Colonel Vickers, 3rd Battalion Commander. Someone she'd never met, name passed through invisible channels the way favors moved in the service. Brief message: need logistics and interference ops experience for weekend training. Paid position. 2 days. Interested. She'd been interested. Not for money, though that helped. Not because she missed it, though she did. But because sitting in her Columbus apartment filing insurance claims and watching cooking shows felt like drowning in slow motion. So she'd agreed. Filled paperwork. Drove down. And now she was here listening to 3 kids who didn't know what they didn't know. The door opened again. The change was immediate. Conversations didn't stop, but they shifted. Quieted. Became focused. A man walked in carrying a Starbucks tray. Maybe 50, built like someone who still ran every morning out of habit and rage. ACUs with rolled sleeves showing forearms covered in ink. Pathfinder tattoos. Air assault wings. Ranger scroll. 1-star rank insignia. Brigadier General Malcolm Rhee. Something in Lena's chest went still. Rhee set the coffee on a table, said something to a sergeant who laughed. Then he turned, scanning the room with the easy authority of someone who'd made 1,000 decisions under fire, and his eyes landed on Lena. On her jacket. On her shoulder. On the ghost of that patch. He went absolutely still. The depot might as well have emptied. Myers and Holland and Chen were still talking. Garcia still typing forklift, still beeping somewhere. But between Lena and the general, everything else vanished. Ree walked toward her, not fast, not slow, steady, purposeful. The walk of someone who trusted his instincts because they'd kept him alive. He stopped 3 feet from the bench. "Where'd you serve with the 519th Echo?" The question wasn't casual. It was a test. A lock and key. Anyone could wear a faded jacket. Anyone could fake stitching. But only someone who'd been there would know how to answer. Lena stood. Slowly because her right leg needed a second. She met his eyes. "Started at Black Dune Forward Operating Base, sir. Winter 2010. Finished on Crimson Ridge, summer 2011. Ree's jaw tightened. Something moved behind his eyes, recognition memory ghosts. "Crimson Ridge. June 7th. Yes, sir. You were Echo Response." "Echo Logistics, sir. But we all responded when it mattered." The general nodded once. Then he turned, and his voice cut through every sound in the depot. "Everyone stop." Silence dropped like a blade. Garcia's hands froze. Myers, Holland, and Chen turned eyes wide. The forklift died. Ree gestured to Lena. "This is Sergeant First Class Lena Trujillo, United States Army retired, 519th Echo Response Group, Triple Black Protocol, 2010 to 2012. He let that breathe. Let people remember or guess what Triple Black meant. June 7th, 2011. Crimson Ridge. Sergeant First Class Trujillo and her unit drew enemy fire off my convoy when we were pinned with no air cover and no backup. They held that position 6 hours, kept 57 people alive. The silence deepened, became something with weight. Including me. Myers had gone gray. Holland stared at his boots. Chen looked sick. "So when you see someone in a worn uniform," Ree continued, voice quiet but surgical, "maybe don't assume you know their story. Maybe don't assume they haven't earned every thread. Maybe shut your mouth and show some respect." He didn't look at the lieutenants directly. Didn't need to. He turned back to Lena. "Ma'am, what do you need?" "Already ordered, sir. Specialist Garcia has it." "Garcia? Sir." Garcia snapped to attention so fast his chair rolled back. "Whatever Sergeant First Class Trujillo needs, she gets. No forms, no delays, no bureaucracy. Clear. Clear, sir." "Get Sergeant Major Hollis down here. Log this properly." "Yes, sir." Garcia was already moving, pulling items, boxing them. Another specialist materialized from the back. Within 90 seconds, boots, perfect fit, and a hydration rig were ready. A stone-faced sergeant major appeared, saluted the general, turned to Lena, extended his hand. "Sergeant Major Hollis, ma'am. Honor." Lena shook it. Firm grip, respectful. "Thank you, Sergeant Major. I'll document this visit properly, and I'll make sure everyone who needs to know, knows." His eyes flicked toward the lieutenants. Message received. Myers finally found his voice, stepped forward. "Ma'am, I need to apologize. I had no right." Lena held up one hand, not angry, just stopping him. "Lieutenant Myers?" "Yes, ma'am." "You didn't ask." He blinked. "Ma'am, you didn't ask. You saw something you didn't understand, and instead of asking, you assumed, made jokes, performed for an audience." She glanced at Holland and Chen, who both looked like they wanted to disappear. "All three of you." Yes, ma'am, Myers said quietly. Here's your lesson. Lena picked up the box. Next time you see something that doesn't make sense, ask before you judge. Verify before you speak. Remember that you don't know what you don't know. She paused. The best soldiers I ever served with stayed humble, listened more than they talked, understood that experience doesn't announce itself. Myers swallowed. Yes, ma'am. Thank you. Don't thank me. Do better. She turned to Ree. Sir, if there's nothing else, I should report to Colonel Vickers. I'll walk you out. They moved toward the door. The depot stayed silent. Lena felt every eye but didn't look back. The point was made. Outside Georgia, sun hit warm and bright. Lena blinked, adjusting. Ree walked beside her, quiet for a long moment. How's the leg? Good days and bad, sir. Today's good. Patterson did that repair at Crimson Ridge. Lena stopped. You remember Patterson? I remember everyone from that day. His voice went soft. Lost him in 13. I know. I went to the funeral. They stood in the sun, two people carrying the same dead. What Echo did that day, Ree said, wasn't in any report I saw. Triple Black kept it buried. Yes, sir. But I remember. That's enough, sir. Ree smiled slightly. Is it? Lena considered. Has to be. They reached her truck, old Ford Ranger dent, in the passenger door. She loaded the box into the bed, turned back to find Ree watching. We're running a joint exercise in 6 weeks. 3rd Battalion and elements from the 75th. I could use Echo experience for OP4 planning. Paid position. Interested? Something stirred in Lena's chest. Not excitement, but close. Purpose. Memory coming back to life. I'll think about it, sir. That's all I ask. He pulled a card from his pocket. My direct number. You decide yes, call me. Lena took it. Thank you, sir. Thank you, Sergeant First Class, for Crimson Ridge, for staying humble, for teaching those kids what they needed. They're good kids, sir. They'll learn. Because of people like you. Ree stepped back, saluted. Lena returned it sharp, precise muscle memory from another life. He turned and walked back toward the depot. Lena climbed into the truck, sat with hands on the wheel. The card rested in her lap, General Ree's name and number, in clean black text. Through the windshield, she watched soldiers move in and out of the depot, the normal Saturday rhythm. Inside, things were already changing. Hollis would make sure. Garcia would tell everyone on shift. The lieutenants would carry it, hopefully learning. And somewhere in the bureaucracy, a note would be made. A policy would shift. A reminder would go out. She started the truck. Engine turned with a familiar rattle, put it in gear, and pulled toward the battalion headquarters where Colonel Vickers was waiting. But as she drove past the depot one last time, she saw Myers standing outside, phone to his ear, face serious. Through the open door, she glimpsed Holland and Chen talking to Sergeant Major Hollis, both at rigid attention. And she wondered what Colonel Vickers hadn't told her about this weekend training. What would require someone with triple black experience? What kind of scenario needed someone who'd held Crimson Ridge for 6 hours with no air support? Her jacket hung on the passenger seat, faded and worn, carrying stories that would never make official records. The ghost outline of the 519th Echo patch caught sunlight through the window, visible only if you knew where to look. Some truths don't need defending, she thought. They just need witnessing. Today, they'd been witnessed. But tomorrow might require something else entirely. The road curved ahead, leading deeper into Fort Adwell, and Lena Trujillo drove forward into whatever came next the way she always had. one mission at a time. The battalion headquarters sat at the end of a tree-lined road that had seen better days. Lena parked between two Humvees and killed the engine. Her phone buzzed text from a number she didn't recognize. "Hollis here. LTs want to speak with you before you leave post. Not required. Your call." She stared at the message, deleted it, climbed out of the truck. The headquarters building smelled like floor wax and old coffee. A specialist at the front desk looked up from his computer. "Help you, ma'am?" "Lena Trujillo. Colonel Vickers is expecting me." The kid's eyes widened slightly. "Yes, ma'am. He said to send you straight back. Second floor, third door on the right." "Thanks." Her leg complained going up the stairs. She ignored it. Knocked once on Vickers' door. "Enter?" Colonel Vickers was younger than she expected, maybe 40, with the kind of lean face that came from running too much and sleeping too little. He stood when she entered, came around the desk with his hand extended. "Sergeant First Class Trujillo, Tom Vickers. Thank you for making the drive." His grip was firm, but not performative. Good sign. "Happy to help, sir?" "Please sit." He gestured to a chair. "Coffee. It's terrible, but it's hot." "I'm good, thank you." Vickers settled back behind his desk, studying her with the careful attention of someone who'd learned to read people under pressure. "I heard there was some excitement at the depot this morning." "Word travels fast. Sergeant Major Hollis called me personally, said I should know who I'm working with." Vickers leaned forward. "Crimson Ridge, the 519th. That's not in any database I can access." "No, sir, it wouldn't be." "But General Rhee was there." "He was." Vickers nodded slowly. "I won't ask questions I'm not cleared to hear answers for. But I will say this when I put out the request for someone with logistics and interference operations experience. I got your name from 3 different sources within 24 hours. That doesn't happen by accident. People remember who kept them alive, sir." "They do." He pulled a folder from his desk drawer. "This weekend's training is more complicated than I indicated in the email. I need to know if you're still interested after you hear the full scope." Lena's instincts, honed over 18 months of reading situations that could turn lethal in seconds, started whispering. "I'm listening." "We're running a joint exercise with the 75th Ranger Regiment. Force-on-force live scenario based on a compound raid with significant civilian presence." Vickers opened the folder. "But that's the cover story for battalion staff. The real training is happening on a secondary level." "Secondary level!" "I have 3 platoon leaders, all fresh from Ranger School, all tactically sound, all convinced they're God's gift to warfare." His voice carried the weight of someone who'd dealt with this problem before. "They plan fast, execute hard, and leave chaos in their wake. I need someone to teach them what their schools didn't, how to operate when the plan falls apart. How to think when the chaos isn't simulated." Lena felt something click into place. "You want me to break them? I want you to show them how real operators handle friction. The kind of friction that gets people killed if you're not humble enough to adapt." Vickers met her eyes. "General Rhee called me 30 minutes ago. Said if you agree to this, I should consider myself lucky. He also said you have a gift for teaching lessons that stick." "The general is generous. Is he wrong?" Lena thought about Myers and Holland and Chen standing at attention with Sergeant Major Hollis. Thought about the look on Myers' face when he'd tried to apologize. Some lessons you had to feel in your bones. "What's the scenario?" Vickers pulled out a map. "Compound in a simulated urban environment. High-value target 12 civilian role players, 4 OP4 defending. Standard hit and extract. The platoon leaders will plan it tonight. Execute tomorrow at ZO 600. And you want me to make it fall apart. I want you to introduce the kind of variables they won't see coming. The kind you dealt with in triple black operations. He paused. I want them to fail in a way that teaches them something. Lena studied the map. Her mind was already working, pulling from muscle memory and hard lessons. I'll need full OPFOR control, no oversight during execution. Done. And I want those 3 platoon leaders in the after-action review. No filters, no rank protection. Also done. Then I'm in, sir. Vickers smiled the kind of smile that said he'd been hoping she'd say yes. Outstanding. Your OPFOR team is already at the training area. Former Marines, all of them led by a gunnery sergeant named Kopech. He's been briefed that you're running the show. When do I meet them? Now if you're ready, I'll drive you out there myself. They took Vickers' truck, a beat-up F-150, that looked like it had seen combat of its own. He drove fast, comfortable with the base roads. Can I ask you something, Sergeant First Class? Lena's fine, sir. Tom, then, when you're not on my clock. He glanced over. What made you say yes to this? The money's not great, the work is, let's be honest, probably beneath your pay grade. Lena watched pine trees blur past. You ever stop doing something you're good at and realize you're not good at anything else? Every day since I took this desk job. That's why? They drove in silence for a while. Then Vickers said, the 3 lieutenants I mentioned. They're good kids. Smart, capable, eager. But they've never failed at anything that mattered. Never had their assumptions shattered. And that scares me, because the first time it happens for real people die. So you want me to shatter them safely? I want you to show them what right looks like when everything's wrong. The training area was 10 miles from main post, a collection of plywood buildings arranged to simulate a small town complete with vehicles, role players, and enough complexity to make things interesting. Vickers parked near a tactical operations center trailer. Your OPFOR team is in Building 7. I'll introduce you to Kopech, then leave you to it. The platoon leaders will arrive at 1700 for their initial brief. You'll observe tonight, then take control tomorrow morning. Understood. Building 7 was the largest structure in the mock town, 3 stories, multiple entry points, enough rooms to make clearing it a nightmare. Lena followed Vickers inside her leg, protesting but manageable. 4 men stood around a table covered in maps and equipment. They looked up when she entered, not with suspicion exactly, but with the careful assessment of people who'd learned to evaluate threats quickly. The oldest stepped forward, Gunnery Sergeant Kopech, if Lena had to guess. Maybe 45, built like a fire hydrant with a face that had seen too much sun and not enough sleep. You're Trujillo. I am. Kopech. These are Sergeants Marsh, Liu, and Dominguez. He gestured to the others. We've been told you're running OPFOR for tomorrow's exercise, and that we should do exactly what you say, no questions asked. That bother you, Gunny? Kopech's face split into a grin. Hell no, ma'am. We've been running these scenarios for 3 months, and every time it's the same thing. Rangers come in hard and fast, shoot everything that moves. Call it a win. Gets boring. I'm hoping you're here to make it interesting. I'm here to make it educational. Even better. Kopech turned back to the table. Liu pulled our standard defensive setup, but I'm guessing you'll want something different. Lena moved to the table, studying the building layout. 3 entry points: front door, back door, second-story balcony access. 12 rooms spread across 3 floors. Stairwells at both ends. It was a tactical puzzle, and she could already see how the platoon leaders would approach it. Fast. Aggressive. Overwhelming force. Tell me about these lieutenants, she said. Marsh spoke up. He was younger than the others, maybe 28, with a Carolina accent. Lieutenant Weston is the senior. Ranger School honor grad, airborne air assault, thinks he's the next McChrystal. His platoon is solid, but they follow him blindly. Lieutenant Park is the opposite, Liu added. Quiet, methodical West Point. She plans everything to death, then executes by the book. Never adapts. And Lieutenant Corbin, Dominguez finished, is just trying not to embarrass himself. His platoon carries him more than he leads them. Lena nodded, filing it away. They'll plan this tonight. Yes, ma'am. Vickers gives them 3 hours, then they present to him and their senior NCOs. Execution at 0600. Who's playing the civilians? Local volunteers. Mix of ages, some with kids. They're briefed to react realistically, panic, confusion, the whole thing. Perfect. Lena traced her finger along the building layout. Gunny, I need you to trust me on something that's going to sound crazy. Ma'am, I once rappelled out of a helicopter into a shit pond because my lieutenant said it was the tactical approach. I can handle crazy. Tomorrow morning I want you to surrender immediately. The room went silent. All 4 men stared at her. Come again, Kopech said. When the Rangers breach, I want you to lay down your weapons, hands up, 0 resistance. Full compliance. Marsh looked confused. But that defeats the whole point of Op 4. We're supposed to make them fight. You're supposed to make them think. And nothing makes someone stop thinking like easy success. Lena looked at each of them. These lieutenants are used to winning, used to their plans working. So we're going to let their plan work perfectly. And then we're going to show them what happens after the victory. Liu's eyes widened. The civilians. The civilians, Lena confirmed. 12 role players, mix of ages. When the Rangers secure the building and start celebrating their clean hit, those civilians are going to react. Panic, trauma, confusion, kids crying, adults demanding answers in languages the Rangers don't speak, medical emergencies from the stress. She paused. And one of those civilians is going to have a heart attack. Jesus, Dominguez muttered. We'll brief the role players tonight. Medical personnel will be standing by. This is theater, not real harm. But the Rangers won't know that. They'll have their tactical victory and a humanitarian crisis on their hands simultaneously. No training for it, no procedures, just chaos and consequences. Kopech was grinning again. That's diabolical, ma'am. That's reality. Gunny, how many raids have you been on where winning the firefight was the easy part? Every single one. Exactly. Lena turned back to the map. The hard part is what happens after. The hard part is the terrified family in the corner, the kid who won't stop screaming, the old man who's having chest pains because soldiers just kicked down his door at dawn. The hard part is realizing that your tactical success just created strategic problems you're not equipped to solve. Vickers, who'd been silent until now, spoke from the doorway. You want them to understand that winning isn't the same as success. I want them to understand that real operations have second and third order effects they need to anticipate. That speed and violence of action are tools, not solutions. That the shooting is usually the smallest part of the mission. Lena looked at Vickers. You said they need to learn how to handle friction. This is friction. It's brilliant, Vickers said quietly. Absolutely brilliant. It's only brilliant if they learn from it. That's where the after-action comes in. Lena pulled out a chair and sat her leg, grateful for the break. When do I get to observe their planning session? 1700. But they won't know you're there, one-way glass in the planning room. You'll see and hear everything. Good. I want to know how they think before I dismantle it. Kopech started briefing his team on the new approach, and Lena listened with half her attention, while the other half worked through variables. The role players would need specific instructions. The medical personnel would need to be positioned perfectly close enough to respond instantly, far enough away to let the scenario play out. The timing would have to be precise. Her phone buzzed again. Same unknown number. Myers here, ma'am. The 3 of us are at the parking lot near HQ. Could we speak with you 5 minutes? We'll understand if the answer is no. Lena stared at the message. Part of her wanted to delete it like she'd deleted Hollis's text. These kids had already gotten their lesson, had already been humiliated in front of their peers and a general officer. But another part of her, the part that remembered being young and stupid and thinking she knew everything, recognized something in that message. Not entitlement, not excuses, just the desire to do better. She typed back, 10 minutes. Stay there. Vickers noticed her expression. Problem. The depot lieutenants want to talk. I'm going to give them 5 minutes, then come back. The ones who gave you trouble this morning. Vickers' face hardened. Want me to handle it? No, sir, I've got it. She stood, and Kopech looked up from his map. Ma'am, before you go, what you did this morning at the depot. That story's already all over Post. Those kids are lucky they're still in the army after embarrassing themselves like that in front of a flag officer. They're lucky General Rhee cares more about teaching than punishing. Is that why you're going to talk to them now? Lena headed for the door. I'm going to talk to them because they asked. That's more than most people do. The walk back to headquarters took longer than it should have. Her leg was done being cooperative, and she didn't have the energy to hide the limp anymore. By the time she reached the parking lot, she was breathing harder than she wanted to admit. Myers, Holland, and Chen stood in a tight cluster near her truck, all three in fresh ACUs, all three looking like they'd rather be anywhere else. When they saw her coming, they snapped to attention. At ease, Lena said. You wanted to talk? Talk. Myers spoke first. His voice steady, but his eyes showing the strain. Ma'am, we know there's nothing we can say that makes this morning okay. We know an apology doesn't fix what we did. But we wanted you to hear 3 things directly from us face to face before you left Post. Lena waited. First, Myers continued, we were wrong. Not just wrong to mock you, but wrong in our thinking. We assumed that valor looks a certain way, acts a certain way, wears a certain uniform, and that assumption was ignorant and dangerous. Holland stepped forward slightly. Second, ma'am, we've spent the last 4 hours reading everything we could find about triple black protocol operations, or trying to. Most of it's classified above our clearance, but we understand now what we were looking at this morning. What you did, what you carry. His voice cracked slightly. And we're ashamed that we didn't recognize it. Chen pushed his glasses up a nervous habit. Third, ma'am, we want to know how to do better. Not just apologize and move on, but actually change. How do we learn to see what we missed? How do we earn the right to lead people like you served with? Lena looked at the 3 of them young, earnest, humiliated, and trying. She thought about all the soldiers she'd served with who never got the chance to learn from their mistakes because their mistakes killed them. You want to know how to do better, she said. Start by asking questions instead of making assumptions. When you see something you don't understand, get curious instead of judgmental. When someone's experience doesn't match your expectations, consider that your expectations might be limited, not that their experience is fake. Yes, ma'am, they said in unison. Second, remember that the people who've been through the most usually say the least. The quietest person in the room might be the most dangerous, the most experienced, the most valuable. Pay attention to who doesn't need to prove themselves. Myers nodded, writing notes on his phone. And third, Lena said, understand that leadership isn't about being the smartest or the strongest or the most decorated. It's about making the people around you better. It's about recognizing talent and experience wherever it comes from, even if it shows up in a worn jacket and scuffed boots. We understand, ma'am, Holland said. Do you? Lena let the question hang. Because understanding intellectually is different from understanding in your bones. You'll face 100 situations in your careers where someone doesn't look like what you expect, doesn't act like what you expect, doesn't fit your picture of competence. And in that moment, you'll have to choose, do you trust your assumptions, or do you ask questions first? Ask questions first, Chen said quietly. Every time, Lena confirmed. Because the cost of being wrong isn't just embarrassment. It's not just a general officer setting you straight. The cost is missing out on the knowledge and experience that could save lives. The cost is losing the respect of people you need. The cost is becoming the kind of leader nobody wants to follow. The three of them absorbed that in silence. Finally, Myers said, "Ma'am, can I ask one more thing?" "Go ahead." "Are we going to be okay career-wise?" He wasn't asking for reassurance, just information. "Because if this follows us, we'll accept that. We earned it. But we need to know." Lena considered. "General Rhee and Sergeant Major Hollis aren't interested in destroying your careers. They're interested in fixing your thinking. What happens next depends entirely on what you do with this lesson. You can let it crush you, or you can let it teach you. Your choice." "Teach us," Holland said immediately. "Then prove it. Not with words, with actions. Show humility in your leadership. Ask for help when you need it. Recognize and respect experience even when it doesn't come with rank or ribbons. And when you see other young officers making the same mistakes you made, correct them. Pass the lesson forward." "We will, ma'am," Chen promised. Lena nodded. "Then we're done here. Get back to your duties. Learn your jobs. Take care of your soldiers." They saluted sharp, crisp, respectful. She returned it and watched them walk away heads together, already talking about what they'd learned. Maybe they'd get it. Maybe they wouldn't. But at least they were trying. She climbed back into her truck and sat for a moment, exhausted. Her leg throbbed. Her head ached. And she still had a planning session to observe at 1700, followed by a full day tomorrow, breaking 3 Ranger-qualified platoon leaders who probably thought they were unbreakable. Her phone buzzed one more time. "General Rhee, heard you met with the depot LTs. Well done. Also heard you're running up for Vickers tomorrow. I'll be there for the AAR. Looking forward to seeing you work." "Great. No pressure." Lena started the truck and drove back toward Building 7 where Kopech and his team were waiting. She had 4 hours to plan tomorrow's scenario perfectly, to brief the role players, to coordinate medical personnel, to ensure that every variable was controlled while appearing completely chaotic. 4 hours to build a teaching moment that would stick with 3 cocky Ranger School graduates for the rest of their careers. 4 hours to prove that the lessons from Crimson Ridge, from Black Dune, from 18 months of triple black operations still mattered in a world that had mostly forgotten they'd ever happened. She parked outside Building 7 and sat in the cab for 1 more minute, gathering herself. Some truths don't need defending, she thought again. They just need witnessing. Tomorrow, 3 lieutenants were going to witness something that would change how they saw their jobs forever. And Lena Trujillo was going to make damn sure the lesson stuck. She walked back into Building 7 and found Kopech's team had already started transforming the space. Furniture moved to create realistic living areas, personal items scattered to make it feel inhabited. Liu was on a ladder, hanging family photos, stock images, but convincing enough. "Role players arrive in 90 minutes, Kopech said, without looking up from his checklist. "Medical team is briefed and standing by. I've got Dominguez running comms with the TOC to make sure Vickers can observe without interfering." "Good." Lena picked up one of the photos Liu had set aside. A family of 4 smiling at a beach somewhere. "We need these people to feel real to the Rangers. Not targets, not obstacles. People. Already on it. Each role player gets a full backstory. Names, occupations, relationships. We're putting wedding photos in the master bedroom, kids' drawings on the refrigerator, prescription bottles in the bathroom cabinet." Kopech finally looked at her. "When those Rangers come through that door tomorrow, they're not going to be clearing a building. They're going to be invading someone's home." "That's exactly right," Marsh called from upstairs. "Ma'am, question about the medical emergency. You want it to be the grandfather figure, right? The one who'll generate maximum emotional response." "Correct. And I want his wife, the grandmother role player, to be the one screaming for help in a language none of the Rangers speak. Make them feel helpless in their own success. You're really twisting the knife, Liu said, but he was grinning. I'm giving them a gift. They just won't recognize it until later. The next 2 hours blurred together. Lena worked with Kopech's team to stage every detail, checking sight lines, ensuring furniture placement would funnel the Rangers exactly where she wanted them. The role players arrived at 16:30, a diverse group of local volunteers who did this regularly for extra money. But when Lena briefed them on tomorrow's scenario, their usual casual attitude shifted. An older woman named Rosa, cast as the grandmother, raised her hand. You want me to actually scream, like really sell the panic? I want you to make those soldiers feel like they just destroyed your world, Lena said. Because in the context of this scenario, they did. Your husband is having a heart attack. Armed men just kicked in your door. Your grandchildren are terrified. You don't speak English well enough to explain what's happening. And these soldiers who came here to save the day suddenly realize they're the ones causing the crisis. Rosa nodded slowly. I can do that. My husband had a real heart attack 3 years ago. I remember exactly how it felt. I'm sorry, Lena said quietly. Don't be. He's fine now, but I'll use it tomorrow. These kids need to learn. A younger volunteer named Marcus, playing one of the Op4 defenders, looked confused. Wait, so we just surrender immediately? That's it. That's it. Hands up, weapons down, full compliance. You're not trying to win a firefight. You're trying to teach a lesson about what comes after the firefight. And what comes after is civilians in crisis, Marcus said, understanding dawning. Smart. By 1650, everything was set. Lena left Kopech finalizing details and headed to the battalion headquarters where Vickers was waiting to take her to the observation room. They walked through empty corridors, fluorescent lights humming overhead. Nervous? Vickers asked. Should I be? These 3 lieutenants are sharp. Weston especially, he'll smell a setup if we're not careful. Good. I want him suspicious. Suspicious people pay attention. Lena followed him into a small room with one-way glass overlooking a larger briefing space. They just won't know what they're supposed to be paying attention to. 3 officers sat around a conference table covered in maps, tablets, and coffee cups. Lena recognized the body language immediately, Weston leaning back with casual confidence, Park hunched forward taking notes. Corbin trying to match Weston's energy, but not quite pulling it off. Vickers handed her a headset. You'll hear everything. They'll present their plan at 1900, then I'll approve it with minor modifications to make them think they're in control. Perfect. The planning session started rough. Weston dominated immediately, laying out an aggressive approach 3-team breach, simultaneous entry from multiple points, overwhelming speed and violence. Park kept trying to inject caution, suggesting they needed more intelligence on the building's interior. Corbin mostly just agreed with whoever had spoken last. We go hard and fast, Weston said, tapping the building schematic. Op4 expects us to be careful to clear methodically, so we do the opposite. We shock them with aggression. In and out in under 10 minutes. What about the civilians? Park asked. Intel says there are 12 non-combatants in the building. We secure them after we neutralize Op4, standard procedure. But if they panic during the breach, then we adapt. That's what Rangers do. Weston's tone carried just enough edge to shut down further questions. Look, I've run scenarios like this a dozen times. The key is speed. The faster we move, the less time anyone has to react. Op4 can't mount an effective defense. Civilians don't have time to get in the way, and we're out before complications develop. Lena watched Park's face tighten. The young woman wanted to push back, but didn't have the confidence or rank to override Weston's certainty. Classic problem. A good leader being silenced by a louder one. Corbin cleared his throat. What if OP4 surrenders immediately? Like doesn't even fight. Weston laughed. They won't. Kopech's team always makes us work for it. That's their job. But if they did, then we secure them and move to the objective. Easy day. Weston stood, stretching. Honestly, I'm more worried about the evaluators making up complications to slow us down. These training scenarios always get overthought by people who haven't done real raids. Lena felt Vickers stiffen beside her. She touched his arm lightly. Let it go. Let Weston hang himself. The planning continued for another hour. Park managed to insert a few procedural safeguards, designated teams for civilian control, medical screening protocols, and evacuation plan if things went wrong. Good instincts. But Weston treated each suggestion like an inconvenience, agreeing only because regulations required it. At 1900, they presented to Vickers. Professional, polished, confident. Weston walked him through the concept of operations, while Park handled details, and Corbin operated the slide presentation. It was a solid brief for a straightforward scenario. Vickers asked a few clarifying questions, suggested minor timing adjustments, then approved it. Execute at 0600. I'll be observing with General Rhee and Sergeant Major Hollis. Make it clean. The three lieutenants left, energized, already talking about assignments and rehearsals. Lena watched them go, seeing younger versions of herself in their swagger. She'd been like that once, convinced speed and aggression solved everything, convinced complications were just obstacles to overwhelm with force. Then Crimson Ridge happened, and she learned different. Vickers turned to her. What do you think? I think they're about to learn the most important lesson of their careers. Will they break? Probably. But breaking isn't the same as failing. Sometimes you need to break before you can build yourself right. They walked out to the parking lot together. The sun was setting, painting the Georgia sky in shades of orange and purple. Lena's leg had moved past pain into a dull numbness that was somehow worse. Where are you staying tonight? Vickers asked. Hadn't thought about it. Maybe drive back to Columbus. That's 4 hours. You're exhausted. He pulled out his phone. I'll get you a room at the on-post hotel, on the battalion's budget. Consider it part of your consultant fee. That's not necessary, sir. Tom. And yes, it is. You're doing me a favor tomorrow that'll probably save lives down the road. Least I can do is make sure you don't fall asleep at the wheel tonight. Lena wanted to argue, but didn't have the energy. Thank you. 05:30 tomorrow. I'll pick you up from the hotel. We'll get coffee before heading to the training area. She drove to the small hotel near the commissary, checked in, and collapsed on the bed without bothering to undress. Her phone showed 3 missed calls from a Columbus number, probably her supervisor at the insurance company, wondering about her time-off request. She'd deal with it Monday. Sleep came fast and hard, the kind that didn't include dreams because her body just shut down. When her alarm went off at 04:45, her leg had stiffened into something approximating cement. She spent 20 minutes in a hot shower trying to convince it to cooperate, then dressed in the same clothes from yesterday and headed to the lobby. Vickers was waiting with 2 large coffees and a look that said he hadn't slept much either. Ready, always. They drove through pre-dawn darkness, the base mostly quiet, except for a few runners and a garbage truck making rounds. Vickers sipped his coffee and didn't talk, which Lena appreciated. Some people felt the need to fill silence. The good ones understood that silence before action was sacred. At the training area, lights were already on in the TOC trailer. Vickers parked, and they walked inside to find Sergeant Major Hollis reviewing radio protocols with 2 specialists. He looked up when they entered. Ma'am, sir, General Rhee is en route ETA 15 minutes. OP-4 is in position. Role players are staged. Medical is standing by. The 3 platoons are doing final checks now. Cameras, Lena asked. 4 angles inside the building, 2 outside. You'll have full visibility without being visible. Hollis handed her a tablet showing multiple video feeds. Control is all yours, ma'am. We're just here to observe. Lena studied the feeds. Kopech and his 3 Marines sat in the building's main room, weapons nearby, but not in hand, looking bored and casual. Perfect. The role players were scattered across different rooms, Rosa and her husband, Carlos, in the master bedroom, a young couple with 2 child actors in another room, an elderly man alone in a small office, and 3 young adults in what was meant to be a converted garage space. It looked lived in. Real. The door opened, and General Rhee walked in, dressed in ACUs, with a rigger's belt and a coffee mug that read, "Ranger Up." He nodded to Vickers and Hollis, then came straight to Lena. "Sergeant First Class, heard you've built something interesting for today." "Just a learning opportunity, sir." "That's what they said about Ranger School. I'm still having nightmares about the Florida phase." His eyes crinkled with amusement. "Show me what you've got." Lena walked him through the setup, explaining the instant surrender, the civilian crisis, the medical emergency. Rhee listened without interrupting his expression, unreadable. When she finished, he was quiet for a long moment. "You're going to break them," he finally said. "Yes, sir." "Good. They need it." He took a seat facing the monitors. "Weston especially. That kid's got talent, but he's drunk on his own capability. Thinks aggression is a strategy instead of a tool. He'll learn different in about 30 minutes. And Park, she already knows, sir. She just needs permission to trust her instincts over Weston's volume." Rhee nodded approvingly. "Proceed whenever you're ready." At exactly 600, the radios crackled. "All elements, this is Weston 6. Execute, execute, execute." The tablet showed 3 teams converging on the building from different angles. Fast, professional, coordinated. They moved with the fluid precision of people who'd rehearsed this a dozen times. Breaching charges blew the front and rear doors simultaneously. Flashbangs detonated inside loud reports that would disorient defenders and signal overwhelming force. The Rangers poured in, and Kopech immediately stood up with his hands raised. "Friendly, friendly, we're surrendering, don't shoot." His 3 Marines followed suit, dropping weapons and raising hands. The Rangers, caught completely off guard by the lack of resistance, took a split second to process, then swarmed forward to secure the Op-4 fighters. Zip-cuffs quick searches all 4 Marines face down on the floor within 20 seconds. Weston's voice came over the radio, confused but confident. "All elements Op-4 secured. Move to objective and civilian control. By the numbers." Teams spread through the building, clearing rooms efficiently. But this is where Lena's planning began to show. Every room they entered contained terrified people, role players, who reacted to armed soldiers kicking in doors exactly the way real people would, screaming. The children started crying immediately, wailing in genuine terror from the flashbangs and shouting. The young couple clutched each other, the man shouting, "Please don't hurt us," in accented English, while his wife sobbed. The 3 young adults in the garage space scattered, one of them falling and clutching his ankle like it was injured. And in the master bedroom, Carlos suddenly grabbed his chest and collapsed. Rosa's scream cut through everything. "Mi esposo, su corazón, ayúdenme por favor." The Rangers in that room froze. One keyed his radio. "Weston 6, we have a civilian down. Possible cardiac event. Request medical." But the radio was chaos now. Multiple teams calling in simultaneous problems. Children wouldn't stop screaming. The young woman was hyperventilating. The injured ankle needed assessment. An elderly man in the office had locked himself in and was shouting that he had rights, demanding to know who authorized this invasion. Weston's voice tried to cut through. All elements maintain control. Medical is standing by. Treat and secure all civilians. Park 6, consolidate your people in the main room for processing. But Park was dealing with her own crisis. The grandmother Rosa had grabbed a young specialist by his vest and wouldn't let go, still screaming in Spanish about her husband dying, about her grandchildren being traumatized, about how could they do this to her family. "Ma'am, please calm down," the specialist kept saying, looking helplessly at his team leader. "Ma'am, we're here to help. Please, no me toques, ayuda a mi esposo." In the TOC trailer, Lena watched the feeds with clinical attention. The Rangers were doing everything technically correct, establishing security, calling for medical, attempting to calm civilians. But technical correctness wasn't solving the human problem in front of them. Because scared people don't respond to procedures. Traumatized children don't care about your mission objectives. A grandmother watching her husband have a heart attack doesn't give a damn about your tactical success. Ree leaned forward in his chair. "Christ, this is brutal." "This is reality, sir." Lena switched between camera feeds. "Every raid I was ever on the shooting was the easy part. It was the aftermath that tested us." On screen, Weston had entered the building himself, trying to impose order through presence and authority. He was giving clear commands, directing teams, calling for medical evacuation. All the right moves, but the chaos wasn't responding to command presence. The medical team arrived role players in EMT uniforms who'd been briefed to be competent but slow to ask questions the Rangers couldn't answer, to need information about Carlos's medical history that nobody had. They worked on him while Rosa continued screaming, and the Rangers could do nothing but stand there watching their clean, tactical victory transform into a humanitarian nightmare. Park's voice came over the radio, strained. "Weston 6, Park 6, recommend we establish a separate area for women and children. They're feeding off each other's fear. We need to separate and de-escalate." Smart. Lena had expected that from her. "Negative," Weston replied. "We maintain central control for security purposes. Just keep them calm. They're not going to calm down with 20 armed soldiers surrounding them. Park 6, maintain discipline on this net." Lena saw Park's face on the camera feed, frustration and anger warring with training. The young woman took a breath and tried a different approach. She knelt beside one of the crying children, a little girl maybe 6 years old, and started talking to her softly. Not commands, just human connection. The girl's crying gradually subsided into hiccuping sobs. Progress. Small, but real. Then Carlos coded. The medical team started CPR, and Rosa's screaming reached a pitch that made even the seasoned Rangers flinch. Several of them looked physically sick. This wasn't supposed to happen. They'd done everything right. Fast, aggressive, overwhelming. Textbook execution. And someone was dying anyway. Corbin's voice panicked. "Weston 6, what do we do? The civilians are losing it. My team can't control them." "Just hold position. Medical is handling the situation." But medical wasn't handling it. Not really. Carlos wasn't responding to CPR. The EMTs called for an AED for advanced life support for immediate evacuation. The Rangers scrambled to clear a path for a stretcher, but the building was crowded with confused, terrified people who didn't understand why they needed to move. In the TOC, Hollis whistled low. "Those kids look shell-shocked." "Because they are," Vickers said quietly. "They just won the battle and lost the war simultaneously." Lena checked her watch. 12 minutes since breach. It felt like an hour. On-screen, Park made a decision. She stood and called out to Weston directly, not on the radio, face-to-face. "Sir, we need to evacuate non-essential personnel now. The children especially. They can't process what's happening, and they're making everything worse." Weston's jaw was tight. He looked around at the chaos, at crying children, at Rosa being physically restrained by 2 specialists so the EMTs could work at his soldiers standing helpless, because their training hadn't covered this. "Do it," he finally said. "Get the kids out. Get the women out if they'll go. Clear the building to essential personnel only." Park moved fast, gathering her team and starting to herd civilians toward the door. But the young mother wouldn't leave without her children, and the children wouldn't leave without their grandmother, and the grandmother wouldn't leave without her husband, who was maybe dying on the floor. Human complications, the kind you can't shoot or breach or flash bang. Rosa suddenly broke free from the specialists and threw herself on Carlos's chest. "No te vayas, por favor, mi amor, no me dejes." The EMTs had to stop CPR. One of them looked at Weston with an expression that said this was above his pay grade. And Weston, for the first time since the exercise started, looked lost. Ree spoke without looking away from the screens. "He's about to call Index. He thinks stopping the exercise will make this better." "It won't," Lena said. "The lesson's already happened. They just don't understand it yet." As if on cue, Weston keyed his radio. All elements. Exercise terminated. Index. The EMTs immediately stopped their performance. Carlos sat up perfectly fine. Rosa wiped her eyes and helped him stand. The crying children quieted as their parents assured them it was over. Just pretend everyone was okay. The Rangers stood in the sudden silence, looking at each other with stunned faces, because they'd just realized they'd been played. Vickers stood. "Time for the after-action. This should be interesting." They walked from the TOC to the main building where Kopech was already herding everyone into the largest room for the debrief. The Rangers filed in slowly, some still shaken, all of them confused. Weston's face was stony. Park looked exhausted. Corbin had removed his helmet and kept running his hands through his hair. The role players and OPFOR fighters gathered on one side, the Rangers on the other. Vickers stood in the middle with General Ree beside him and called for attention. "That was an unmitigated disaster," he said flatly. "And I need you to understand it was supposed to be. Sergeant First Class Trujillo, please explain what just happened here." Lena stepped forward, and every eye in the room turned to her. She saw recognition flash across several faces they'd heard about the depot incident. "Good. You executed a tactically perfect raid," she began. "Fast, aggressive, coordinated. Your breach was textbook. Your security was solid. Your procedures were correct. And everything still fell apart. Can anyone tell me why?" Silence. Lieutenant Park. Park straightened. "Because we treated it like a tactical problem when it was a human problem, ma'am." Elaborate. "We focused on winning the fight. We didn't plan for what happened after we won. We didn't account for how civilians would react to having their home invaded. We didn't prepare for medical emergencies or language barriers or terrified children." Park's voice grew stronger. "We optimized for speed and violence of action, and we forgot that speed and violence have consequences." "Correct." Lena looked at Weston. "Lieutenant, you said during planning that complications were just obstacles to overwhelm with force. Do you still believe that—" Weston's jaw worked. "No, ma'am." "Why not? Because some complications can't be solved with force. You can't shoot your way out of a grandmother having a breakdown. You can't flashbang a language barrier. You can't—" He stopped, struggling. "You can't tactical your way out of human suffering." "Exactly right." Lena walked among them slowly. "Every single person in this room will eventually face a moment where the shooting stops and the hard part begins, where your tactical success creates strategic problems, where winning makes things worse instead of better. And in that moment, everything you know about violence and aggression becomes useless. She stopped in front of Carlos and Rosa. This man and woman are volunteers who come here to help train soldiers. They've done this scenario 100 times, but today, Rosa drew on a real memory, her husband's actual heart attack 3 years ago. She used real trauma to teach you something. Carlos risked looking foolish playing dead on the floor while you all panicked. They gave you a gift. Lena turned back to the Rangers. The lesson isn't that you failed. The lesson is that success is more complicated than you thought. That winning a firefight is necessary but not sufficient. That the hard part of your job isn't the fighting, it's everything that comes after. The decisions you make when there's no clear enemy, no obvious target, just scared people, and complicated situations and consequences you didn't anticipate. The room was absolutely silent. Lieutenant Weston, you're a talented officer. You'll go far, but only if you learn to value caution as much as aggression. Only if you understand that the loudest voice in the planning room isn't always the right one. Weston nodded, jaw still tight. Lieutenant Park, you have excellent instincts. Trust them. When you see problems that need addressing, address them. Don't wait for permission from someone who's more confident but less right. Park's eyes widened slightly. Yes, ma'am. And Lieutenant Corbin, you're trying to find your leadership voice. Stop looking for it in other people. Your soldiers need you to be steady, not exciting. They need you to think clearly when others panic. That's a different kind of strength, but it's just as valuable. Corbin straightened. Understood, ma'am. General Rhee stepped forward. I'm going to add one thing. This exercise was designed by someone who's been exactly where you'll be in a situation where nothing worked right, where people were dying despite your best efforts, where success felt like failure. Sergeant First Class Trujillo held a position at Crimson Ridge for 6 hours, with no support, no backup, and civilians in the crossfire. She knows what you just experienced because she's lived it for real, and she's trying to give you a gift, the chance to learn these lessons in a safe environment, instead of learning them when lives actually depend on you getting it right. He looked at each of them. Don't waste that gift. Vickers dismissed everyone except the 3 lieutenants and their senior NCOs. Those groups gathered for individual after-actions, and Lena could hear the conversation starting heated but productive, challenged, but learning. She stepped outside into morning sunlight and found Kopech waiting. That was a hell of a lesson, ma'am. Think it'll stick? With Park, absolutely. With Corbin, probably. With Weston. Kopech shrugged. He's either going to internalize it and become great, or resent it and stay mediocre. Time will tell. That's all we can do. Give them the information. They decide what to do with it. Kopech extended his hand. Honor working with you, Sergeant First Class. She shook it. Likewise, Gunny. He walked back toward his team, and Lena stood alone for a moment, feeling the weight of the morning lift slightly. Her leg ached, but it was manageable. Her head was clear, and for the first time in a long time, she felt like she'd done something that mattered. Vickers emerged from the building with General Rhee. They walked over together, both wearing expressions of satisfaction. That was exceptional work, Vickers said. I'd like to hire you for every exercise we run. I appreciate that, sir, but I think today was a one-time thing. Is it? Rhee asked. Because I meant what I said about the joint exercise in 6 weeks. I need someone with your experience for the OPFOR planning. And after seeing this, I'm convinced you're exactly who we need. Lena considered. The smart answer was no. Go back to Columbus, back to insurance claims, back to the safe life she'd built. But safe wasn't the same as alive. And today, for the first time in years, she'd felt alive. I'll think about it, sir. That's still all I ask. Rhee handed her a folder. Payment authorization and paperwork for today. And my offer stands. You decide you want back in even part-time, you call me. Yes, sir. She took the folder and walked to her truck, aware of eyes following her. Some grateful, some curious, some resentful. She'd made an impact today, for better or worse. The drive back to Columbus stretched ahead 4 hours of highway and time to think. But as Lena pulled out of the training area, she glanced in the rearview mirror and saw the 3 lieutenants standing together outside the building, talking intensely. Learning, growing, becoming better officers because someone had cared enough to break them safely. Some lessons you had to feel in your bones before you could understand them in your head. Today, 3 young leaders had felt something that would stay with them for the rest of their careers. And Lena Trujillo, retired logistics NCO, with a faded jacket and a limp from Crimson Ridge, had given them that gift. Maybe that was enough. Or maybe she thought as she merged onto the highway, maybe it was just the beginning. The highway stretched empty ahead, just Lena and the hum of her truck's engine, and too many thoughts fighting for attention. She'd made it maybe 20 miles when her phone rang through the Bluetooth. Unknown number, but Fort Adwell area code. She almost didn't answer, then hit the button. Trujillo. Ma'am, it's Lieutenant Park. I hope it's okay that I'm calling. Sergeant Major Hollis gave me your number. Lena kept her eyes on the road. What do you need, Lieutenant? Park's voice caught slightly. I wanted to thank you for what you said in the AAR about trusting my instincts. Nobody's ever told me that before. Then nobody's been paying attention. That's kind of the problem, ma'am. I've spent my whole career being told I overthink things, that I need to be more decisive, more aggressive, that good officers trust their gut and move fast. Park paused. But my gut this morning was screaming that we were missing something. I just didn't have the confidence to push harder. You pushed. Weston shut you down. Because I let him. I deferred to his certainty instead of trusting my own analysis. The frustration in Park's voice was raw. And people, even in a training scenario, people suffered because I didn't fight harder for what I knew was right. Lena changed lanes to pass a semi. You know what the difference is between you and Weston? What? He's never been wrong when it mattered. You can hear it in how he talks, how he plans. Everything's always worked for him, so he thinks everything will always work. But you... Lena glanced at the phone display. You've been wrong before. You've felt consequences. That makes you cautious, and people mistake caution for weakness. But caution informed by experience isn't weakness. It's wisdom. Park was quiet for a moment. How did you know I've been wrong before? Because nobody who's only succeeded talks the way you do. Nobody who's only won questions themselves the way you question yourself. Lena passed the semi and moved back into the right lane. What happened? ROTC. My senior year, I was Cadet Battalion Commander. We were running a field exercise, and I had just a feeling that the weather was going to turn bad. We were already behind schedule, and my tactical officer was pushing us to continue. So I overrode my instincts and kept going. Park's voice went flat. 3 cadets got hypothermia. One of them almost died. And I learned that my feelings weren't just anxiety or overthinking. They were my brain processing information my conscious mind hadn't caught up to yet. And you've been second-guessing yourself ever since. Yes, ma'am. Stop. Lena said it firmly. You learned the right lesson from the wrong situation. The lesson wasn't, don't trust yourself. The lesson was, trust yourself even when it's inconvenient for other people. Especially then. But what if I'm wrong? Then you're wrong. But you own it, learn from it, and move forward. That's leadership. Lena merged onto I-185. The worst leaders are the ones who are never wrong because they never admit mistakes. The best ones are wrong sometimes, but they're honest about it and they adjust. You're in the second category. Stay there. Park let out a breath that might have been half a laugh. You know, before today I'd never heard of you. Now I want to follow you around and take notes on everything you say. God, please don't. I'm exhausting enough for myself. This time Park did laugh. Fair enough. But ma'am, if you decide to do more training like this, I'd like to be involved. As a student or an assistant or whatever you need. I learned more in 2 hours this morning than I learned in 4 years of ROTC. I'll keep that in mind, Lieutenant. Thank you, ma'am, for everything. I'll let you go. The line went dead, and Lena drove in silence for another 10 miles, thinking about young officers and second chances, and the weight of lessons learned too late, or just in time. Her phone rang again. This time she recognized the number her supervisor at the insurance company. Hey, David? Lena, thank God. I've been trying to reach you since yesterday. Are you okay? I'm fine. Just had something come up. I sent the time off request through the system. I know I approved it, but we've got a situation here that I really need your help with. David's voice carried stress. You remember the Thompson case? The commercial property claim from the fire last month? Lena did remember. Complicated case, lots of documentation, angry client. What about it? Thompson's lawyer is threatening to sue. Says we're acting in bad faith, dragging our feet, the usual. I need someone to review the entire file and prepare a response. You're the only one here who can do it right. David, I'm driving back from Fort Adwell. I won't be in the office until Monday at earliest. Can you work from home? I can have everything sent to your email. I just need your eyes on this before Thompson's lawyer files paperwork. Lena felt the familiar weight settling back onto her shoulders. The weight of obligations and expectations, and a job that was fine, just fine, perfectly adequate. A job where her competence made her indispensable for things that didn't matter. I'll look at it Monday morning, first thing. Lena, please. This is urgent. Monday morning, she repeated. Thompson's lawyer isn't filing on a weekend. We have time. David made a frustrated sound. You've been different lately. Distant. Is everything okay? Everything's fine. I just need the weekend. I'll handle Thompson on Monday, I promise. She ended the call before he could push further. Her exit was coming up. She could stop for gas and coffee, maybe something to eat. But as she approached the exit ramp, she kept driving. Past Columbus. Past her apartment with its beige walls and stack of insurance files and TV that played cooking shows to fill the silence. She kept driving because she didn't want to go back yet. Didn't want to trade the feeling of mattering for the reality of processing paperwork nobody would remember. 50 miles later, she found herself pulling into a rest stop. Parked under a tree. Pulled out General Rhee's card and stared at it. 6 weeks. Joint exercise. OP4 planning. Part-time consulting work that would let her use skills that actually meant something, that would let her teach lessons that saved lives instead of processing claims that saved money. She could do both. Keep the insurance job for stability, take military consulting work for purpose. Lots of retired service members did it. It was practical. It was also terrifying. Because once she admitted that she wanted to be back in that world even part-time, she'd have to face how much she'd been pretending the last 3 years. Pretending that civilian life was enough. That safety was the same as satisfaction. That not being in pain was the same as being alive. Her phone buzzed. Text from a number she didn't recognize. Ma'am, it's Specialist Garcia from the depot. I hope this isn't inappropriate, but I wanted to say what you did yesterday changed something here. Those LTs have been telling everyone they meet about you, about respect and humility and asking questions. They're different. Thank you. Before she could respond, another text came through. Different number. Sergeant First Class Trujillo. This is Gunnery Sergeant Kopech. General Rhee asked me to reach out. He's putting together a training cadre for the joint exercise and wants you as senior advisor. Pays better than weekend consulting. Interested. Then another. This one from Colonel Vickers. Lena, I know you said today was one time, but I'm hearing from my company commanders that word about the exercise has spread. Junior officers are asking about training opportunities focused on post-conflict operations. There's appetite for this. Please consider making it a regular thing. She sat in her truck, reading the messages over and over. 3 years she'd been invisible. 3 years of filing claims and watching TV and pretending her limp was the only scar that mattered. And now after one weekend, people saw her again, wanted her expertise, valued her experience, needed what she could teach. Her phone rang. General Rhee, she answered. Sir? Where are you right now, Sergeant First Class? Rest stop somewhere between Fort Adwell and Columbus. Why? Because I'm looking at a formal proposal to create a training consultancy program for post-conflict operations and civilian interface scenarios. It would be based at Fort Adwell, part-time positions for retired NCOs and officers with relevant experience. You'd be the lead instructor. Lena's heart was suddenly too loud in her chest. Sir, Before you say no, listen. This isn't charity. This is recognition that we're failing to prepare junior leaders for the hardest parts of their jobs. Today proved that. You proved that one well-designed scenario teaches more than 100 PowerPoint presentations. Rhee's voice was matter-of-fact. The Army needs this program. I need this program. And you're the right person to run it. I have a job, sir. Obligations. I know. This would be part-time initially. 20 days per quarter, maybe less. Flexible scheduling. You could keep your civilian work if you wanted. He paused. But I'm betting once you start, you won't want to. That's a hell of an assumption, General. Is it wrong? Lena stared through the windshield at a family loading into a minivan. 2 kids fighting over something while their parents looked exhausted. Normal life. Safe life. The kind of life she'd been trying to convince herself she wanted. I need to think about it. Fair enough. But Lena, he'd dropped the rank, making it personal. You felt something today. I saw it in how you moved, how you taught, how you connected with those role players and Marines and even those scared lieutenants. You felt alive. And life's too short to spend it feeling any other way. He hung up before she could respond. She sat there for a long time, engine off, windows cracked, listening to the sounds of the rest stop. Cars coming and going, families arguing and laughing, trucks rumbling past on the highway. The ordinary noise of people living ordinary lives. And she made a decision. She called David back. Lena, thank God. Did you reconsider about Thompson? No. But I am putting in my 2 weeks' notice effective Monday. Silence. Then, why did you get another offer? Something like that? Insurance or something else? Something else. Lena, we can talk about this. If it's about money, I can probably get you a raise. If it's about flexibility. It's not about any of that, David. You've been a good supervisor. The company's been fine. But I need to do work that matters in a way this doesn't. Not to you, maybe, but to me. I don't understand. I know. And that's okay. Lena started the truck. I'll have everything wrapped up before I leave. I'll make sure Thompson's case is handled. I won't leave you in a bad position. Is there anything I can say to change your mind? No. But I appreciate you asking. She ended the call and immediately dialed General Rhee. He answered on the first ring. That was fast. I'm in, sir. Lead instructor part-time, initially flexible scheduling. When do we start? How about Monday? Come to Fort Adwell. We'll do paperwork and start planning the joint exercise training. I can do Monday. Outstanding. And Lena, welcome back. Thank you, sir. She pulled back onto the highway, but this time she wasn't going to Columbus. She was going back to Fort Adwell, to her hotel room, to a weekend of planning and thinking and preparing for a life that looked nothing like the safe one she'd been hiding in. The drive went fast. By the time she parked at the hotel, it was late afternoon, and her leg was screaming, but her mind was clear. She checked back in, showered, and sat down with her laptop to start making notes about training scenarios and learning objectives and all the lessons from Crimson Ridge and Black Dune that nobody had ever asked her to share. Until now. Her phone buzzed constantly, Garcia sending articles about training methodology, Park asking questions about planning, Kopech sharing ideas for scenarios. Even Myers sent a message, brief, formal, but sincere, thanking her for not ending his career when she could have. She answered them all. Offered advice, made connections, started building what felt like a team, even though she'd only just decided to do this. Around 8, someone knocked on her door. She opened it to find Colonel Vickers holding 2 pizzas and a 6-pack of beer. "Heard you were staying another night? Figured you might be hungry." Lena stepped back to let him in. "This is above and beyond, sir. Tom, and this is selfish. I want to pick your brain about the training program before General Rhee gets all your time." He set the pizza on the small table. "Also, I wanted to say congratulations. What you're building is going to change how we prepare leaders. That matters." They ate pizza and talked through scenarios. Vickers had a dozen ideas for training evolutions, each one targeting a specific gap in junior officer development. Lena refined them. Added complexity suggested ways to make lessons stick without being preachy. "You're good at this," Vickers said eventually. "Teaching, I mean. You make complicated ideas accessible." "I just remember what it felt like to learn things the hard way. If I can help someone learn them the easier way, why wouldn't I? Most people who've been through what you've been through just want to forget it. Move on. Leave it behind." Lena took a sip of beer. "I tried that for 3 years. Turns out I'm not most people." "No, you're not." Vickers stood to leave. "I'll let you get some rest. But before I go, there's something you should know. Lieutenant Weston requested a meeting with me and General Rhee tomorrow morning. He wants to discuss implementing humility training for all new officers in the battalion." Weston. The kid who thought complications were just obstacles to overwhelm. The same one. Apparently this morning broke something open in him, or broke something that needed breaking. Vickers smiled. "You did that. In one exercise, you changed how that young officer sees his job. That's power." After he left, Lena sat alone with her thoughts and half a pizza, and the beginning of something that felt like hope. She pulled up her email and started drafting a message to General Rhee, outlining her vision for the training program. Core principles. Learning objectives. Assessment criteria. She wrote for hours, the words flowing easier than anything she'd written in years. Because this mattered. Because people would be better at their jobs because of this. Because somewhere down the line, some lieutenant would face a crisis and remember a lesson learned in a plywood building at Fort Adwell, and that memory might save lives. Around midnight, she finally closed the laptop and lay down. Her leg throbbed, but it was manageable. Her mind raced, but it was productive. And for the first time in 3 years, she fell asleep, excited about tomorrow, instead of dreading it. Sunday morning came early. She met General Rhee at the base dining facility where he bought her breakfast and introduced her to 3 other retired NCOs he was recruiting for the training cadre. All of them had similar backgrounds. Special Operations Triple Black, adjacent the kind of experience that didn't make official records, but shaped how modern warfare actually worked. They clicked immediately, spoke the same language, shared the same frustrations about junior leaders who thought speed and aggression solved everything. By the time breakfast ended, they'd outlined 6 months of training scenarios and divided responsibilities based on expertise. "This is happening fast. One of them, a former Marine named Sarah Okonkwo, said. Usually military programs take years to develop. Usually military programs aren't this necessary, Ree replied. And usually I don't have someone like Sergeant First Class Trujillo willing to make it happen. They spent the rest of the day in a conference room doing administrative work. Background checks, security clearances, contracts, insurance paperwork. The bureaucracy of making something real. Lena signed forms until her hand cramped, but she didn't mind. Each signature was a commitment. Each form was a bridge between her old life and this new one. By late afternoon, it was official. She was lead instructor for the Fort Adwell Post-Conflict Operations Training Program, reporting directly to General Ree with a salary that was less than her insurance job, but enough to live on. Start date immediately. We'll need a name that's less of a mouthful, Ree said. Any ideas? Lena thought about it. About Crimson Ridge and Black Dune and all the lessons learned in blood and sand, about Patterson humming Johnny Cash while stitching her jacket, about the contractor going pale at the depot when he recognized her patch, about ghost stitching that marked things invisible to most people, but meaningful to those who knew. The Echo program, she said, because we're teaching echoes of real experience. Because the best lessons echo forward through careers. Because you earned that name. Ree finished. I like it. The Echo program it is. They wrapped up around 6. Lena drove back to Columbus one last time to pack up her apartment, give notice to her landlord, and start the process of moving her life back to Fort Adwell. The apartment looked smaller than she remembered. Beige walls, stacks of insurance files she'd never finish. TV remote on the coffee table next to takeout menus. This had been safety. This had been the life she'd built after Crimson Ridge, after the surgeries, after accepting that her military career was over. But safety wasn't the same as living. She started packing. Her phone rang. Lieutenant Park. Ma'am, I heard about the Echo program. That's incredible. News travels fast. Sergeant Major Hollis sent out an announcement. It's all anyone's talking about. Park paused. Ma'am, would you consider taking on a junior instructor, someone who could learn the methodology and eventually help teach? You volunteering, Lieutenant. Yes, ma'am. I know I'm junior. I know I have a lot to learn. But what I saw this weekend, what you built, that's the kind of training I want to be part of. The kind that actually prepares people for reality instead of checking boxes. Lena thought about it. About Park's instincts. About how she'd been shut down by Weston but kept pushing anyway. About how she'd knelt beside that crying child and made human connection instead of just enforcing control. You still have a platoon to lead, Lieutenant. I know, but I could help on weekends during planning phases. Whatever you need. I just want to learn how to do what you do. What I do is teach hard lessons that make people uncomfortable. You sure you want that? I'm sure, Park said without hesitation. Because uncomfortable lessons are the ones that stick. You taught me that. All right. I'll talk to General Ree about adding you as a training assistant. But Park, yes, ma'am. This isn't going to be easy. You're going to see young officers fail. You're going to watch people struggle with lessons that feel cruel. You're going to question whether we're helping or hurting. And you'll have to trust that breaking people safely is better than letting them break when it costs lives. I understand, ma'am. I hope so. Because once you start seeing warfare the way we teach it as human problems with tactical solutions, instead of tactical problems with human complications, you can't unsee it. It changes how you lead, how you plan, how you evaluate success. I'm ready for that change. Then welcome to Echo Program, Lieutenant. We start planning Wednesday. After Park hung up, Lena continued packing. Clothes, books, the few personal items she'd accumulated. Most of it didn't matter. Most of it was just props for a life she'd stopped living years ago. The last thing she packed was her field jacket. Faded, frayed, with ghost stitching on the shoulder where the 519th Echo patch used to be. She folded it carefully and placed it in a box marked important. Because it was important. Because it represented 18 months of her life that had shaped everything after. Because Patterson had stitched the elbow while humming Johnny Cash, and that mattered even though Patterson was dead. Some things you carried forward, some lessons you passed on, some truths you kept teaching until people understood them deep enough to matter. Her phone buzzed one more time. Unknown number. She almost ignored it, but something made her answer. Is this Sergeant First Class Trujillo? Yes. Who's this? My name is Captain Jennifer Rhodes, 2nd Battalion, 75th Ranger Regiment. General Rhee gave me your number. I heard about the training exercise you ran this weekend, and I have 18 platoon leaders who need exactly that kind of education. Can we talk about bringing Echo program to Fort Benning? Lena sat down on her half-packed couch and smiled. Yeah, she said. We can definitely talk about that. They talked for an hour. Rhodes had been in combat, had seen the same problems Lena had seen, aggressive young leaders who optimized for violence and forgot about consequences, who won firefights and created humanitarian disasters, who measured success in enemy killed instead of missions truly accomplished. By the time the call ended, Lena had commitments for 3 training exercises at Fort Benning over the next 6 months, with potential for more if the first ones went well. The Echo program wasn't just an idea anymore. It was becoming something real, something needed, something that would ripple forward through careers and deployments and split-second decisions made in the chaos of actual operations. She finished packing around midnight, loaded her truck in the dark, took one last look at the apartment that had been her hiding place and her recovery space, and her quiet surrender to a life that didn't hurt. Then she locked the door, dropped the keys in the landlord's mailbox, and drove back to Fort Adwell through empty highways and sleeping towns, back to work that mattered, back to teaching lessons that saved lives, back to being Sergeant First Class Lena Trujillo, not in spite of Crimson Ridge and the limp and the ghost stitching on her shoulder, but because of them. Because some truths don't need defending. They just need witnessing. And some witnesses need to become teachers. The road ahead was dark but clear. Her leg ached but held. And for the first time in 3 years, Lena wasn't running from her past. She was building a future from it. She arrived at Fort Adwell just before dawn, checked into a longer-term room at the on-post hotel, and was in General Rhee's office by 0700 Monday morning. He looked up from his computer when she knocked, gestured her in without ceremony. You look tired. I am tired, sir, but I'm here. Good enough. He pulled up a document on his screen. Captain Rhodes from Benning called me last night. Said you two talked for an hour about bringing Echo program to the 75th. She's enthusiastic. She gets it, sir. She's seen the same problems we're trying to solve. Then let's solve them. Rhee stood and grabbed his coffee mug. We've got a meeting in 20 minutes with the post commander. He wants to understand what we're building before he commits resources. You ready to brief? Always. They walked across post together, Rhee moving fast enough that Lena's leg protested, but she kept pace anyway. The post commander's office was in the old headquarters building, wood-paneled and formal, in a way that spoke to decades of Army tradition. Colonel Marcus Brennan was maybe 55, with the kind of weathered face that came from too many deployments and not enough sleep. He stood when they entered, shook hands firmly. General Rhee speaks highly of you, Sergeant First Class. Says you're going to revolutionize how we train junior leaders. I'm going to try, sir, Tell me how." Lena spent 15 minutes walking him through the concept. Not the theory, not the bureaucracy, just the problem and the solution. Junior leaders optimized for tactical success, but unprepared for strategic consequences. Training that checked boxes but didn't teach real skills. A gap between what schools taught and what combat required. Brennan listened without interrupting. When she finished, he leaned back in his chair. "You know what you're describing. You're describing every mistake I made as a young officer, every time I thought winning the fight meant winning the mission, every time I prioritized speed over understanding." He looked at Ree. "How soon can we scale this?" "That depends on resources, sir. Right now we have Sergeant First Class Trujillo, 3 other retired NCOs, and Lieutenant Park as a training assistant. We can run 1 exercise every 2 weeks, maybe 20 participants each time." "Not enough. If this works, and I believe it will, every junior officer on this post needs to go through it. Every NCO above E6 needs to understand the methodology. We're talking hundreds of people." Lena felt her stomach tighten. Hundreds of people meant infrastructure, funding, permanent staff. It meant turning a small program into something institutional, which meant bureaucracy and politics, and all the things that killed good ideas slowly. Brennan must have seen her expression. "I know what you're thinking, Sergeant First Class. You're thinking I'm going to bury this in red tape and turn it into another PowerPoint factory. I'm not. But I am going to resource it properly, which means dedicated training facilities, full-time staff positions, and a budget that lets you do this right. Sir, with respect, I've seen good programs die under the weight of their own success. I've seen teaching positions turn into administrative jobs where nobody actually trains anymore." "Then we'll make sure that doesn't happen." Brennan pulled out a notebook and started writing. "Here's what I'm authorizing. A dedicated training complex at the far end of the airfield, 3 buildings we're not using perfect for scenarios. 5 full-time instructor positions, including yours as lead. Budget for role players' equipment and travel to other installations. And most importantly, autonomy. You report to General Ree, he reports to me, and nobody else interferes with your methodology." Ree was grinning. "Sir, that's necessary. If we're going to do this, we do it right." Brennan looked at Lena. "But I need something from you. I need a demonstration. Something I can show to Division Command, to other post commanders, to the people who control funding and policy. I need proof that this works in a way they can't ignore." "What kind of demonstration?" "The joint exercise in 6 weeks. General Ree told me about it, 3rd Battalion, and elements from the 75th Force-on-Force in a complex urban environment. I want Echo Program to run the entire OP4 component. I want you to design scenarios that break these kids just like you broke those lieutenants this weekend. And I want senior leaders observing who can see the difference between traditional training and what you're building." Lena looked at Ree, who nodded slightly. Permission and encouragement in one gesture. 6 weeks isn't much time, sir." "It's what we have. Can you do it?" She thought about Crimson Ridge. About holding a position for 6 hours with no support, because 6 hours was what the mission required. About Patterson keeping people alive with limited supplies and limitless determination. About every impossible thing she'd done because someone needed it done. "Yes, sir. We can do it." "Outstanding. General Ree will handle the administrative details. You focus on building something that changes minds." Brennan stood, signaling the meeting was over. "And Sergeant First Class, thank you for coming back, for caring enough to teach. The Army needs more people like you." Walking back across Post Ree was quiet until they were out of earshot of anyone else. "You just committed to the biggest training exercise this post has seen in 5 years. You feeling okay about that? Ask me in 6 weeks, sir." "Fair enough. But for what it's worth, I wouldn't have put you in that room if I didn't think you could deliver." He stopped walking. You're going to need help. Real help, not just good intentions. I'm assigning you a logistics sergeant, a medical coordinator, and an operations officer. They'll handle the details so you can focus on the teaching. Who? People I trust. People who've been where you've been. Ree pulled out his phone and made a call. Sergeant Major Hollis, I'm with Sergeant First Class Trujillo. We need to talk about the joint exercise. You free now. Apparently, Hollis was free. They met him at the training complex Colonel Brennan had mentioned, 3 large buildings connected by covered walkways, currently being used for storage. Hollis walked through with them, pointing out possibilities. Building 1 could be residential apartments, houses the whole neighborhood setup. Building 2 is commercial shops, offices, public spaces. Building 3 is industrial or military warehouses, command posts, whatever you need. He turned to Lena. What are you thinking for scenarios? I'm thinking we don't just train them on one type of operation. I'm thinking we run 3 simultaneous scenarios with different challenges: raid, humanitarian assistance, and civil disturbance. 3 different platoons, 3 different problems all happening at the same time, so they can't share lessons or resources. Hollis whistled. That's ambitious. That's necessary. Real deployments don't happen one problem at a time. You're dealing with security threats and humanitarian crises and political complications all at once. If we train them in isolation, we're training them wrong. She's right, Ree said. What do you need to make it happen, Sergeant Major? At least 40 role players with specific training. Medical personnel who can simulate casualties realistically. A coordination center to track all 3 scenarios simultaneously. And about 1,000 hours of preparation time we don't have. Then we'd better start now. Lena pulled out her phone and opened her notes app. Scenario 1, raid on a suspected weapons cache that turns out to be a medical clinic. Scenario 2, humanitarian aid distribution that gets complicated by local power struggles. Scenario 3, civil protest that turns violent, but maybe isn't what it seems. She spent the next 3 hours with Hollis and Ree, sketching out details. By the time they broke for lunch, she had rough plans for all 3 scenarios, a list of resources needed, and a growing team of people who understood what she was trying to build. Over lunch at the dining facility, Lieutenant Park appeared with a tablet and a determined expression. Ma'am, I mapped out a training timeline for the next 6 weeks. If we start recruiting role players today, begin facility setup by Wednesday, and run 3 rehearsals before the actual exercise, we can make this work. Lena took the tablet and studied Park's timeline. It was thorough, realistic, and still insanely aggressive. You did this overnight. I couldn't sleep. Kept thinking about what you said about teaching hard lessons that stick. This is going to stick, ma'am, but only if we do it right. Then let's do it right. Lena handed back the tablet. You're now the Assistant Operations Officer for Echo Program. Congratulations, you just tripled your workload. Park grinned. Thank you, ma'am. The next 5 weeks blurred together in a chaos of preparation that somehow worked. Lena and her team, growing daily as word spread, and people volunteered, transformed the 3 buildings into fully functional training environments. They recruited role players from the local community, briefing them not just on what to do, but why it mattered. They coordinated with medical personnel to create realistic casualty scenarios. They built in complications and variables that would force the junior leaders to adapt or fail. Lieutenant Weston showed up one afternoon, asking if he could observe the preparation. Lena almost said no, then reconsidered. You can observe if you help. We need someone to test the scenarios from the trainee perspective. Weston spent 2 days walking through each building, identifying gaps and suggesting improvements. His insights were valuable because he thought like the people they were training, aggressive, confident, looking for ways to overwhelm problems with speed and force. This is going to destroy them, he said after finishing the civil disturbance scenario. They're going to come in expecting a simple crowd control situation, and instead, they're going to get a powder keg with a dozen ways to make it worse. That's the point. I know. And it's brilliant. Weston looked at her with something like respect. I've been thinking about what you said in the AAR, about complications not being obstacles to overwhelm. I recommended a policy change to Colonel Vickers. Every mission brief now has to include a section on second and third order effects. Not just what we're trying to accomplish, but what might happen because we accomplished it. How's that going? Some people love it. Some people think it's overthinking. But nobody can argue it's not necessary. He paused. I also wanted to apologize again for the depot. I know I did that already, but I've had time to really think about what I said, what I assumed. And I'm ashamed. Then use that shame to do better. I am. I swear I am. 2 weeks before the exercise, Captain Rhodes from Fort Benning arrived with 3 of her platoon leaders to observe a rehearsal. Lena walked them through the setup, explaining the methodology and the reasoning behind each complication. One of the platoon leaders, a young woman named Lieutenant Sanchez, raised her hand. Ma'am, this feels like we're setting people up to fail. Is that fair? Fair to who? To the lieutenants who get embarrassed in training, or to the people who'll die in combat if those lieutenants don't learn these lessons now? Lena met her eyes. I'd rather break your confidence in a plywood building than have you break someone's life in a real operation. Sanchez nodded slowly. That's a good point. It's the only point that matters. The rehearsals revealed problems they fixed quickly. Timing issues, communication gaps, role players who were too compliant or not compliant enough. But each rehearsal got smoother, and by the final one, Lena felt confident they'd built something that would teach exactly the lessons it needed to teach. The night before the exercise, she couldn't sleep. She sat in her hotel room reviewing notes, checking details, making sure nothing was forgotten. Her phone buzzed around midnight. General Rhee, you ready for tomorrow? As ready as I'll ever be, sir. That's the right answer. Get some sleep. You've built something remarkable. Now trust it. She tried to sleep. Managed maybe 3 hours before giving up and going for a walk around post. The air was cool, pre-dawn quiet, and her leg cooperated enough that she could move without too much pain. She walked past the depot where this had all started, past the battalion headquarters, where she'd first met Vickers, past the training complex, where tomorrow would prove whether Echo program was brilliant or just another well-intentioned failure. At 0500, she was in the TOC with her team. Hollis coordinating communications, Park managing logistics. The 3 other retired NCOs, Sarah Okonkwo, Michael Chen, and James Keller, each overseeing one scenario. 40 role players briefed and ready, medical personnel staged, cameras positioned, everything set. The trainee platoons arrived at 0530 for their briefings. 12 platoon leaders total, each convinced they knew what they were doing, each about to learn different. Colonel Brennan was there along with General Rhee and 4 other senior officers from division headquarters. The observation room was crowded with people who'd come to see if Echo program was worth the investment. Lena felt the pressure, but pushed it aside. This wasn't about impressing senior leaders. This was about teaching junior leaders lessons that would save lives later. At 600, the 3 scenarios kicked off simultaneously. The raid went wrong immediately. The platoon leader breached hard and fast, secured the building efficiently, and then realized they'd just terrorized a medical clinic full of sick civilians. The doctor, played by a role player who was an actual doctor, started demanding answers in broken English, while patients panicked and medications got trampled in the chaos. The humanitarian assistance scenario spiraled when local role players, briefed to portray rival political factions, started fighting over who controlled distribution. The platoon leader tried to maintain order, but couldn't tell who was legitimately needy and who was manipulating the system. Meanwhile, people who actually needed help were being pushed aside. The civil disturbance scenario was the worst. What looked like a simple protest turned out to be a cover for a medical emergency. In the crowd, a role player having a seizure. But the platoon leader focused on maintaining control and preventing violence didn't notice until someone in the crowd started screaming for help. By then, the situation had deteriorated into chaos. In the TOC, Lena watched all 3 scenarios unfold on monitors, seeing the exact moments when each platoon leader realized their approach wasn't working. Seeing the panic, the confusion, the desperate attempts to regain control. Seeing them break. Colonel Brennan stood beside her, watching silently. After 20 minutes, he said quietly, "This is hard to watch." "Yes, sir." "But necessary." "Yes, sir." The scenarios ran for 90 minutes. By the end, all 3 platoon leaders had called Endex overwhelmed by complications they couldn't overcome with force or speed. Their soldiers looked exhausted and confused. The role players had done their jobs perfectly, creating realistic chaos that exposed every gap in the training. The after-action review took place in a large briefing room with all 12 platoon leaders, their senior NCOs, and the observing senior officers. Lena stood at the front with her team, and for a moment she felt the weight of every eye in the room. Then she started teaching. She walked them through each scenario, not with judgment, but with analysis, showing them where they'd succeeded tactically but failed strategically, pointing out moments when speed had made things worse instead of better, highlighting opportunities they'd missed because they were focused on control instead of understanding. Lieutenant Park presented data charts showing decision points, timelines of escalation comparisons between what the platoon leaders had planned and what actually happened. The numbers told a story that was hard to argue with. Then Lena brought in the role players. The doctor from the medical clinic, the rival faction leaders from the aid distribution, the woman who'd had the seizure during the protest. She let them tell their experiences, let the platoon leaders hear what it felt like to be on the receiving end of their tactical decisions. The room was silent. Several of the platoon leaders looked like they might cry. "You're not failures," Lena said finally. "You're learners. You just experienced in 90 minutes what some people don't learn until it costs lives. That's a gift, even though it doesn't feel like one right now." One platoon leader raised his hand. "Ma'am, how do we do better? How do we prepare for situations like this?" "You start by understanding that your job isn't just to win. It's to win in a way that doesn't create more problems than you solve. You plan for second and third order effects. You listen to people who've been there. You stay humble enough to admit when you don't know something. And you remember that civilians aren't obstacles or background. They're the reason the mission matters." Another hand. "But ma'am, in real combat, we don't have time for all that analysis. We have to act fast." "You're right. But acting fast and thinking clearly aren't mutually exclusive. The best operators I ever served with could process complicated situations in seconds because they'd trained themselves to see beyond the tactical." Lena looked around the room. "That's what Echo program teaches. Not slower decision-making, smarter decision-making." The questions continued for an hour. Good questions, honest questions. Questions that showed these young leaders were processing hard lessons and trying to figure out how to apply them. Finally, Colonel Brennan stood. "I've seen enough. Echo program is exactly what this army needs. Sergeant First Class Trujillo, you have my full support and whatever resources you need to expand this. General Rhee, let's talk about making this a permanent schoolhouse, not just a Fort Adwell program." In the parking lot afterward, Lena stood alone for a moment, feeling the weight of the day settle into her bones. Her leg throbbed. Her head ached. but her chest felt light in a way it hadn't in years. General Rhee approached 2 coffees in hand. He offered her one. "You changed the Army today. You know that, right?" "I taught a class, sir." "No. You built a program that's going to ripple forward through decades of leadership. You gave these kids something their schools never could perspective from someone who's lived the consequences of bad decisions. That matters." Lena sipped the coffee. It was terrible, but it was hot. "What happens now?" "Now we scale it. We bring Echo program to every combat installation in the Army. We train hundreds of instructors in your methodology. We make this how we prepare leaders, not just what we do when we have extra time." Rhee looked at her. "And you're going to lead that effort, not as a part-time consultant, as a civilian GS-13 senior training advisor with full authority to set standards and methodology." "Sir, I don't know if—" "I do. I know exactly what you're capable of because I saw you hold Crimson Ridge when everyone else would have run. I saw you build this program from nothing in 6 weeks. I see you teaching lessons that stick because you're not reading from doctrine, you're sharing scars." He paused. "Say yes, Lena." She thought about her apartment in Columbus, about insurance files and cooking shows, and a life that didn't hurt but didn't help either. She thought about the young platoon leader who'd asked how to do better about Park's determination to learn about Weston's growth from arrogant to thoughtful. She thought about Patterson humming Johnny Cash while stitching her jacket, and about how the best way to honor the dead was to keep the living from joining them. "Yes, sir." Over the next 6 months, Echo program grew from a single installation to an Army-wide initiative. Lena hired more instructors, all of them veterans with real experience and hard-earned wisdom. She developed a certification program to ensure consistency. She wrote doctrine that somehow captured the lessons without losing the humanity. Lieutenant Park became her deputy, growing into the role with a combination of tactical competence and emotional intelligence that made her invaluable. Weston took command of a company and implemented Echo methodology in his training with remarkable results. Even Myers Holland and Chen from the depot showed up one day, asking if they could go through instructor certification. The program wasn't perfect. Some people resisted, claiming it was too soft or too complicated or too focused on feelings instead of facts. But the results spoke for themselves. Platoons trained through Echo program performed measurably better in complex scenarios, made fewer catastrophic errors, and adapted more quickly when plans fell apart. A year after that weekend at the depot, Lena stood in front of a room of 200 instructors from across the Army, teaching them how to teach the lessons she'd learned at Crimson Ridge and Black Dune, and 100 other places that didn't make official records. General Rhee introduced her simply. "This is Sergeant First Class Lena Trujillo, founder of Echo program. She's going to show you how to train leaders who win wars without losing themselves." She taught for 3 hours, sharing stories and methods and hard truths. When she finished, the room erupted in applause. Not polite protocol applause. Real appreciation from people who understood what she'd built and why it mattered. Afterward, a young sergeant approached her hesitantly. "Ma'am, I heard about what happened at the depot. About those lieutenants who mocked your jacket. Is that true?" "It's true. And you didn't end their careers, you taught them instead." "I did." "Why?" Lena thought about it. About second chances and hard lessons, and the difference between punishment and teaching. About how the best leaders were often the ones who'd failed and learned instead of succeeding and stagnating. Because people deserve the chance to do better. Because destroying someone's career doesn't make the Army stronger, teaching them does. Because the point isn't revenge. It's growth. The sergeant nodded slowly. That's pretty remarkable, ma'am. It's just practical. We need good leaders. Sometimes we have to build them from broken pieces. That evening, Lena drove back to Fort Adwell, alone, windows down, music playing softly. Her legs still ached sometimes, but it was manageable. Her life was full in a way it hadn't been in years, full of purpose and connection and work that mattered. She passed the depot, where it had all started, where 3 young lieutenants had made assumptions about a woman in a faded jacket and learned the hardest way why assumptions were dangerous. She thought about Patterson and Crimson Ridge and all the people she'd served with, who'd given everything so others could live. She thought about the ghost stitching on her shoulder, invisible to most, but meaningful to those who knew. Some truths don't need defending. They just need witnessing. And some witnesses need to become teachers so the lessons echo forward through generations of leaders who'll face their own Crimson Ridges and make better choices because someone cared enough to teach them. Lena Trujillo had been that someone, had taken her pain and her limp and her invisible scars and transformed them into something that saved lives she'd never meet in places she'd never see. She'd turned her breaking point into a teaching point, her worst days into someone else's preparation, her story into everyone's lesson. And that was enough. More than enough. It was everything that mattered.